manga that began serialization back in 2018 and is receiving an anime adaptation in the fall of 2020. At the time of writing this, the first episode was previewed prior to when it's actually going to air in October, and with it being an adaptation, naturally there are going to be questions about things that are changed as the medium shifts from the page to the screen. With that in mind, I thought it might be interesting to look at what was changed and what stayed the same, as well as reasons as to why. As always though, feel free to leave your thoughts in the form of a comment, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for future videos. Immediately, there is a slight reordering of events, as the first episode actually starts with the beginning of the second chapter in the manga, with Satoru Gojo interrogating Itadori for a reason unbeknownst to first-time viewers. The start of chapter 1, which is Megumi looking for the special grade cursed object, gets pushed back just a bit. I think this choice was made to create a greater sense of intrigue. Megumi looking for an object we don't have full context for accomplishes that, but only for the first chunk of the chapter or episode, whereas Itadori being captured keeps that mystery going. By the end of the episode, you're probably able to put 2 and 2 together with the dialogue Gojo gives at the start, but there's still plenty left to the imagination, and overall the intrigue is more relevant to the overarching story of Jujutsu Kaisen. Overall, I'd call it a serviceable change that doesn't take anything away from the manga. From here, it's a pretty standard adaptation of the rest of the first chapter, which is pretty normal considering the length most first chapters in Shonen Jump are. Pretty much all of the gags in the first half of the episode are executed with a nice visual flair. I like how well in the manga there's just an entire page dedicated to Itadori's shot put throw to convey his strength. In the anime, you just see it quickly yeet over the heads of 2 spectators before hearing the crash. Like with the majority of the jokes, they're adapted in a way that makes sense with the tone. I think comedy in battle shonen is at its worst when the adaptation of one small panel gag messes with the flow of a scene. But here so far they have yet to overstay their welcome. They're incredibly snappy, and it sets a fun mood for the purpose of juxtaposing with the more tonally serious second half after Itadori goes to visit his grandpa in the hospital for the last time. From that point onward, the episode isn't devoid of comedy per se, but it's carried by Itadori's dialogue and quirks as opposed to a shift in visual style like we saw earlier. This is largely in step with the manga as well, barring the occasional exaggerated face in a small side panel, which again, if adapted beat for beat, would have messed with the more eerie and dark tone. So going forward, I do have a degree of confidence regarding the interpretation of the source material from a structural level. There is an aspect though that I'm a bit more on the fence about after one episode, and that's the changes made to some of the fight choreography. It's not uncommon for changes to happen in this department for the sake of things like flow and staging with the scenes, since action scenes in manga don't tend to illustrate every bit of movement. Likewise, it's not unusual for fights to be more fleshed out and therefore longer in the anime, requiring more choreography. And I am reserving judgment with Jujutsu Kaisen for now, since there isn't a ton of fighting in the first episode, but even with what was adapted, there were some minor changes made. For example, the first 2-page spread in the chapter is this, when Itadori leaps through the window and kicks the cursed spirit to rescue his friends. It's a short exchange that illustrates Akutami's simple but great paneling with regards to fight scenes, something which has long been lauded as one of Jujutsu Kaisen's strengths. But jumping back to the anime, instead of doing a kick, Itadori grabs the edge of the windowsill to redirect his momentum and flip himself up above the cursed spirit before punching it and rescuing his friends. It's added flair, and I'm not going to be too critical of it. The manga has the advantage of simply showing 2 small panels of him grabbing his friends, and on the next page they're all safely away from the cursed spirit. It's entirely possible that the transition from Itadori leading with his legs to grabbing his friends and getting away just felt awkward or couldn't be done fast enough to make it both feel natural and keep up with the fast pace of the rescue. I'm mostly willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, though Sung-ho Park's previous adaptation in God of High School also took some creative liberties when adapting its fight scenes to less than universal praise. I'm not going to be overly pessimistic, just cautious. Especially since even this small change does, at least for me, alter Itadori's character a bit. His actions make him seem more strategically inclined in the anime, with him thinking to grab on the windowsill and flip up, whereas just crashing through with reckless abandon in the manga gives off a much more straightforward mindset. Fiercely loyal and doesn't give a fuck about his own safety. I don't think the change is inherently bad, but it is a change. It'll be interesting to see if this alters someone's early impressions of him if they're watching the anime first. though it's also entirely possible that I'm just overthinking this. The other change in fight choreography, in my opinion, is fine and makes sense why it was changed. This being most of Megumi and Itadori's fight with the cursed spirit on the roof of the school. The story beats are basically the same, except instead of the duo talking before Itadori unceremoniously munches on the cursed finger, the dialogue is happening as he's attempting to fend off the cursed spirit. This adds a sense of urgency and desperation that fits with what's happened at the school so far. In manga, there's no concrete way to know how fast or slow a fan will read what you've drawn. Paneling, dialogue, and page turns can help, of course, but ultimately it falls on the reader to interpret the time from panel to panel and page to page. So you can have Megumi and Itadori essentially stop and talk to each other without it feeling like you're being pulled out of the moment. In anime, a decision has to be made with how fast or slow that translation is going to be, which I think is partially why this change was made. Having them just stand around talking with the cursed spirit right there might have just felt like too much of a standstill considering the surrounding action. This does also make Itadori's decision to eat the finger come from a place more of desperation, as he was just about to be eaten himself, a last resort option compared to him more acting on a whim. And while I understand the change, I am a little disappointed we were deprived of one of the best panels from Chapter 1. From Sukuna's appearance onward, it's almost entirely beat for beat. I like the choice to have the shadows slowly come off him with the moonlight, which really fits with his comment about experiencing said light. The exaggeration here is also a pretty good attempt at replicating the maniacal laughter and style from this panel, which would have been hard to copy exactly as is. I also really enjoyed this shot rotating around Sukuna. I think it totally works to suck you into his presence and the threat he poses, even though the full context of how dangerous he is hasn't been explained yet. It sets a good stage for the cliffhanger at the end, which is identical to how the first chapter concludes. Overall, this was a pretty solid first episode. There's nothing that jumps out to me as a wholly bad change, and there are even moments, like with Itadori and his grandpa, that struck me a bit more than when I read it in the manga. Adaptation always involves some level of change, and so bearing that in mind, I'm hopeful going forward. I'm not going to try and dismiss anything outright. But those are just my thoughts, and as always, I would love to hear what you have to say. Have you watched or read Jujutsu Kaisen yet? And in both cases, what did you think of the first episode? Are you as hopeful as I am, or are you a bit more pessimistic? Also, since this is the start of the fall season, let me know what else you'll be watching. Answers to those, whether they're a single word or an entire lengthy essay, as well as any other questions you may have, can be left down below. Thank you so much for watching though, and as always, an especially big thanks goes out to my awesome patrons, OverjoyedSoup, MVPino, Cardrose, and everyone else whose support helps make videos like these possible. Links to that Patreon if you'd like to join them, my shirts, and everything else are either down below or on the screen right now. Be sure to hit that like button and click that bell for notifications so you know whenever a new video goes up. You can also follow me on Twitter or Twitch. Thanks again for watching, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time.